The Yellow River. In ancient times, people called it the River Mother. Its waters were both kind and cruel. Every year the river flooded, washing over fields, tearing down huts, and yet leaving behind the dark, fertile soil that made life possible. Imagine a small farming family, living in a simple earthen house by the riverbank. The walls are made of packed mud, thick enough to keep out the cold wind in winter and the heat of summer. The roof is thatched with straw. At dawn, smoke drifts slowly upward from a clay stove where millet porridge simmers. The meal is plain: a handful of grains, a few wild greens, perhaps a salted fish if fortune has been kind. After the long work of planting rice seedlings, the family gathers by the river to water their fields. It's back-breaking work, but necessary. Without water, there is no harvest. The Yellow River provides life, but it takes as well. One wrong step and a foot can slip from the muddy bank into the rushing water. A moment's distraction and a whole hut can be washed away during the floods. Respect the river, the old people say, for its moods are like a woman's. One day she is calm and placid, the next a raging torrent. When the river floods all along its banks, families must flee to higher ground, abandoning their homes and crops to the water. Some have lost everything to the river. Their houses are gone, their fields are ruined. What will they do now? The river gives, and the river takes away. It's all the same to her. Only the mountains are permanent, the old people say. Look to the mountains for constancy. Look to the river for change. Now, imagine that you are walking along the riverbank when you see something unusual. A large, flat rock monolith. Hey, you've never noticed this before. You walk up to it and see that someone has carved something into the stone. You look closely and realize that there are many such carvings here, some only a few inches high, others reaching up to 10 feet tall. All around the rock monolith, there are figures carved in low relief, humans and animals, each frozen in a moment of action. Some of the figures seem to be dancing, their arms raised overhead, while others appear to be engaged in hunting or fighting. There are even strange creatures that seem to have multiple heads or bodies. These must be demons, you think, or perhaps gods. There are so many, and they are so lifelike. It must have taken years to carve them all. But why would anyone spend so much time and effort on such a project? Who were these people? Where did they go? You continue your walk along the riverbank, pondering these questions, and suddenly you come across another rock monolith, and then another and another. It seems as though there are hundreds of them here, stretching as far as the eye can see. Each one is covered with countless carvings, each one a testament to a time long past. You are overwhelmed by the sheer number of them. How could so many people have lived here so long ago? And what happened to them? As you stand there contemplating the mysteries of the past, you feel a sense of awe at the ingenuity and creativity of the ancient people who lived here. You wonder what secrets these carvings hold, and what stories they could tell, if only we could understand their language. For a moment, you feel connected to them across the vast expanse of time. United by your shared humanity and our enduring curiosity about the past. When the sun is barely a whisper on the horizon, when the world is still veiled in the soft darkness of dawn, our story begins. Not with a jarring noise or a sudden movement, but with the measured steps of a farmer and his ox walking into a field. The old man is our protagonist. His face, a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of sun and toil, is stoic. His eyes reflecting the patience of one who has spent a lifetime reading the rhythms of the land. Today is no different from any other day. He is going about his daily work, tending to the fields, planting crops, ensuring the continuation of life on the land he has known for so long. His companion is his ox, an embodiment of strength and tranquility. Their steps are slow, deliberate, a silent symphony of man and beast working in unison. The air is still, and the only sound is the gentle rhythm of their progress, punctuated by the occasional creak of the wooden plow that cuts through the damp soil like a knife through butter. The earth they till was once underwater, a fact made evident by the glistening expanse of wet mud that stretches as far as the eye can see. It's a hard, heavy step, each footprint leaving an imprint in the yielding soil. But the man does not hurry. He is attuned to the land, understanding its moods, its needs, its language. There is no need to rush. The work will be done when it is done. Behind him, his children follow, their movements a blur in the pre-dawn light. They, too, are a part of this timeless ritual, scattering seeds with small hands that have learned the ways of the field. Their bare feet find purchase on the damp earth as they press the seeds gently into the furrows left by the plow. In these fields, millet grows, a hardy crop that thrives on the land's bounty. And where the land is wetter, rice takes root, nurtured by the water that dances on the paddies. It is a back-breaking, thankless task, one that demands not just physical endurance, but also a deep understanding of nature's cycles. The work of the farmer is one of solitude, of communion with the earth, of whispered conversations with the wind, and the rain of shared silences with the patient ox that is his constant companion. As the sun climbs higher in the sky, the world awakens to the sounds of the village. Roosters crow, dogs bark, children laugh, da-da. But here in the fields, the rhythm continues, uninterrupted, timeless. The seeds are in the ground, the furrows are filled, and the cycle that sustains life begins anew. Days will pass, weeks will turn into months. The rains will come, the crops will grow, reaching for the sky with verdant green stalks. Then the cycle will turn again, and the hands that now scatter seeds will gather the ripe grain, the golden wheat, the life-giving rice. Each grain a testament to the farmer's toil, each sheaf a victory over the relentless march of time. They will thresh the grain, separating the precious kernels from the chaff, and the sound of their labor will be the music of life. For the farmer and his children, there is no greater music than this. There's no sweeter song than the one the wind whispers through the ripening grain. In the tapestry of life, where every thread tells a story, the farmer's tale is one of quiet strength, of resilience woven into the very fabric of the land they inhabit. Their lives are a verse in the grand poem of existence, a celebration of the human spirit's indomitable will to nurture, to persevere, to create life from the very earth itself. This scene is from the French painter Jean-François Millet's painting called The Gleaners. Do you see them? 3 women are gathering up the grain that has been left behind after the wheat has been harvested. It's hard, tedious work, but someone has to do it. They're not just doing it, they're gleaning, which means they're gathering up the grain with care and respect. No one is excluded from this harvest. Every bit of grain that can be saved will be saved. In the distance, the river glitters in the sunlight. Its surface looks so calm, but everyone remembers the floods. Everyone except perhaps the children. They were born after the last flood. They only know about it from stories. But each year when the river threatens to overflow, they run to the hills. And there they stay until the water subsides and the fields are dry once more. Each family builds small dikes and irrigation ditches to guide the water from the river onto their fields. Without these, the plants would wither and die. The river gives life, but it also takes life. This wooden bucket creaks as it is lowered into the well. Up and down, up and down. Ropes fray, hands blister. These women, they know hardship. Their hands are strong and sure. Inside the home, the women weave hemp fibers into coarse cloth. Day after day, the loom knocks gently, back and forth, steady as a heartbeat. Outside, children chase chickens, gather firewood, and grind grain with heavy stones. The sound of grinding is slow, rough, unchanging, stone against stone, turning seeds into flour. This is a world without electricity or running water. In the fields, the wind whispers secrets to the swaying grain. Secrets of sun and rain, of storms and thunder, secrets of earth and sky. The trees seem to listen, and when the wind shifts, they rustle their leaves in agreement. In the distance, the mountains stand silent and strong, their peaks touching the clouds. They have seen the rise and fall of many rivers, the changing of seasons, the growth and decay of countless civilizations. Only the mountains remain unchanged, steadfast and enduring. The old woman sits on a stool by the fire, her wrinkled face illuminated by the flickering flames. She has lived a long life, full of both joy and sorrow, love and loss. Her eyes, though, they still sparkle with a youthful curiosity. She has seen much, but she is not jaded. She finds beauty in the everyday, poetry in the ordinary. A young girl enters, her hair adorned with wildflowers. She dances for her mother, twirling and leaping with the grace and abandon of youth. The old woman watches, a smile gracing her lips. She, too, had danced when she was young, and she sees in the girl a reflection of her former self. The music may be gone, but the memory of it lingers in the laughter of children and the rustling of leaves. They are a simple people, these villagers. Their lives may be hard, their days filled with toil, but they find joy in the simple things, in the warmth of the sun, the laughter of children, the beauty of the natural world around them. They are resilient. These villagers, their spirits unbroken by hardship. They face each new day with courage, knowing that whatever challenges come their way, they will face them together, as they have always done. And so life goes on in the village by the river, day after day, season after season. The river flows on, a constant in a world of change, a reminder of both the power and the beauty of nature. The villagers live in harmony with the river, respecting its power and working to harness its bounty. They are part of the land, and the land is part of them. The old woman sat on the edge of her mat, her cloudy eyes gazing into the dancing flames of the oil lamp. Outside, the night was vast and dark, the sky a heavy blanket of indigo, the earth a darker shade still. There were no electric lights to pierce the gloom, no candles to break the endless black with tiny points of flame. For the people who lived by the Yellow River thousands of years ago, the night was a vast, unknowable expanse, filled with the rustlings of unseen things and the whisper of the river flowing past. There were no books, no writings for common people to read, no stories to escape into. There were only stories told by word of mouth, stories of their ancestors, stories of the river spirits, stories of survival. The river flows outside, unseen in the dark, whispering through reeds and stones. It was a constant presence in their lives, as constant as the sun in the sky or the moon, a silent, watchful deity. The lamplight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls of the hut. The family huddled closer, their faces illuminated for a moment, then plunged back into darkness as the flame danced and died down. The old woman's wrinkled face was a roadmap of her life, a life lived close to the land, close to the river, a life of hard work and quiet desperation. Her cloudy eyes, though, were filled with a strange, unsettling clarity. She had seen a lot of summers come and go, a lot of seasons turn. She had seen good years and bad years, but through it all, she had endured, just as the river endured. Each year was a circle, each day a smaller circle within it. Spring was planting, the time when the river, swollen from winter snows and rains, surged over the banks, turning the fields into muddy swamps. It was a dangerous time, a reminder of the river's raw power, but also a time of great hope. The flooded fields were rich, fertile grounds, a promise of plenty to come. Summer was growth. The crops sprouted, grew, reached for the sun. The days were long and hot, the nights warm and humid. The river was at its fullest now, a shimmering, endless ribbon under a sky that blazed with summer sun. Autumn was harvest. The crops were gathered in, the river receded, revealing the treasures it had deposited during the floods. The air turned crisp and cool, the sky a clear, pale blue. Winter was waiting. The family gathered around the meager fire, sharing what little warmth it offered against the biting wind. The river was a hardened, dangerous thing now, its surface choked with ice, its flow slowed, its breath a frosty cloud on the air. It was a time of scarcity, a time for conserving, a time for patience. The old woman's gnarled hand tightened on her cane. Patience was not a choice. It was the only way to live. You could not fight the river, not in spring when it flooded your fields, nor in summer when its waters scorched your crops, nor in autumn when it took your harvest, nor in winter when it froze your world. All you could do was wait. Wait for the cycle to turn. Wait for the river to give. Wait for the sun to return. The youngest of the family, a girl with eyes as bright and dark as the river at night, tugged on her grandmother's sleeve. Her small voice, though, was drowned out by the roar of the river. The old woman smiled, a slow, sad smile. Yes, the river was always there, always a part of their lives, shaping their days, their routines, their fears, their hopes. They were nothing without the river, just as the river was nothing without those who lived by it. They were one, the river and the people, in its waters, in its floods, in its bounty, in its fury, in its endless patient flow. The night deepened, the river flowed, and the family waited for the dawn. For the sun to chase away the endless black and set the world to rights once more. For the people by the yellow river, the night was never truly dark. The river may have been a thing of fear, a bringer of destruction, but it was also a life source, a provider, a constant. And as long as it flowed, as long as it endured, so would they. The yellow river carried not only water and silt, it carried stories. Stories of rulers whose names were whispered across centuries. The first dynasty, they say, was the Shaya. Its memory is faint, like a shadow on stone, hard to touch but impossible to erase. The Shaya were said to be founded by Yu the Great, a man who tamed the floods. But the taming was not with force. He did not try to fight the river. He guided it. He dug channels, widened streams, and let the water wander in its own paths. For this patience, the people remembered him as a king. There's a problem, though. No one can prove that Yu the Great really existed. Most historians agree that he's a mythical figure, a symbol of the Xia dynasty, much like King Arthur is to Britain or the Emperor Jinmu is to Japan. But unlike those legendary figures, Yu the Great left behind no palaces, no weapons, not even a broken teacup to prove that he lived. His existence, like the river, has worn away with time. But the Yellow River carried another story too, the story of Temps, the ruler after Yu the Great. And here the records are clearer. Tang moved his capital from one of the most fertile regions in all of China to the great city of Yangcheng. There, according to legend, he built walls 26 feet high to keep out the Kong barbarians. And while no archaeologist has discovered these walls, some believe they may have been the inspiration for the Great Wall of China 2,000 years later. Tang also waged war against the eastern tribes, but his campaigns were not about land or gold or slaves. He went to war to end the fighting. According to one story, he defeated a rival king, then asked for only one thing, for the king to swear never to attack the Xia again. When the astonished nobles asked why their new emperor bothered to take prisoners instead of killing them, he replied, "If you treat your subjects well, they will love you. If you love them, you will be willing to die for you." Is that not worth one prisoner? After Tang came more emperors, more stories, good and bad. There was a time when the Xia grew weak and were almost destroyed by the Shang, yet they survived. And whether they ruled wisely or foolishly, they kept passing down one thing, the mandate of heaven. It gave them the right to rule, but it also made them responsible for the people. Each new ruler had to live up to this mandate. If he didn't, he could lose the mandate, which meant he lost his throne. This was the second story carried by the Yellow River, the story of a legacy of power, of responsibility, and of hope. For the people living along the river, their lives were shaped by the floods, by the silt, and by the stories. They watched as each new ruler tried to live up to the mandate, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing. But through it all, the river kept flowing, carried the drowned bodies of emperors and the hopes of their descendants. It witnessed rebellions and migrations, famines and recoveries. It saw the rise of cities, then their abandonment. Sometimes the river brought death and destruction. Other times it brought life and fertility. All along its banks, the river gave and took. The people living along its banks learned to give back. They offered sacrifices to the gods. They honored their ancestors. They built shrines and temples. In return, they asked for protection from floods, for guidance in planting, and for a good harvest. They believed the river was a living thing, and in a way it was alive in the plants and animals it supported, in the cities it nourished, and in the stories it carried from one end of China to the other. For thousands of years, the Yellow River shaped Chinese life, giving and taking, destroying and creating. It flowed past farmlands and battlefields, shaping the landscape and the people who lived there. As the dynasties rose and fell, the river kept flowing, carrying the hopes and dreams of generations. It was a silent witness to history, a living memory of a changing world. And in its depths, it held stories of emperors and farmers, of love and loss, of life and death. A panorama of human experience played out against the timeless backdrop of the Yellow River. The Xia passed into legend, and in time the Shang arose. Here, history grows more visible. In the quiet dark of their temples, fires glowed against bronze vessels. The air was heavy with smoke from burning bones and shells. Priests and diviners would carve questions into turtle plastrons, or the shoulder blades of oxen. The questions were simple, yet profound. Will the harvest be good? Will the rain come? Will the king's child survive? The bone was then heated until it cracked. The cracks were read like messages from the spirits, answers whispered through fire. These are the oracle bones, the first written records of China. Each stroke of the knife, each line of ancient script, was slow and deliberate. A question carved into eternity, some 3,000 years ago. Here in the heart of China, a people called the Shang were asking the spirits a very important question: what is destiny? They had no way of knowing that their question would echo through time. Carried on the winds of change across the plains and over the mountains to a young woman named Ling. Ling lived 2,000 years later in a small village on the edge of the Gobi Desert. She was an artist, a maker of exquisite porcelain, and her work was in demand throughout the land. But lately, a darkness had fallen over her. She worked all day, but at night, she dreamed of the future. And what she saw was troubling. She dreamed of a great flood that would swallow the land, drowning the cities and burying the villages under the weight of the water. When she awoke, she told her husband, a scholar who pored over ancient texts, of the visions that plagued her sleep. He listened patiently, and when she was done, he reached out and took her hand. "Do not fear," he said, "for we will ask the spirits if your visions are true, and they will tell us." Together, they traveled to the great city of Anyang, the spiritual capital of China, where at the Temple of Heaven. Ling's husband sought the wisdom of the priests. There they burned incense and made offerings, and then he asked the all-important question, will there be a great flood? The priest looked grave as he turned the plastron of the turtle over in his hands. Finally he spoke. "The river has broken its banks and the fields are flooded. The people are in peril. Only sacrifice can stop the disaster." His words echoed the warnings Ling had seen in her dreams, so the couple made a vow. When they returned home, they threw themselves into preparing for the flood. They gathered food and supplies and built a boat to save themselves and their family. When the rains came, they were ready. As the waters rose, they watched their neighbors drown or flee to safety. Many did not survive the deluge. But Ling and her family were safe in their boat. They survived the flood, carrying with them the knowledge that they had heeded the warnings of the spirits. And so they lived, guided by the whispers of the past, shaped by the rhythms of nature, and sustained by the wisdom of the ancients. For the Shang, life was a delicate balance between the natural and the spiritual, between the tangible world and the realm of the ancestors. For them, the course of human events was controlled by the spirits. It was the job of the Shang kings to maintain harmony between the two worlds. When the balance tipped, disaster struck. Floods, droughts, pestilence, even the rise and fall of nations were the work of the spirits. But the Shang kings were not without allies. They had the orators, men and women who could speak with the dead. Through rituals, sacrifices, and divination, the orators kept the lines of communication open between the living and the departed. They were the intermediaries between the tangible world and the realm of the spirits. Oracles played a vital role in Shang society. They were consulted on matters of state, the health of the king, the outcome of battles, even the success of the harvest. The priests performed rituals to invoke the spirits, seeking their favor and guidance. They made offerings of food, wine, and precious objects, hoping to appease the gods and avert disaster. Sometimes the oracles spoke through the movements of priests, who would dance and sing, entranced by the spirits. At other times, they whispered their messages through the patterns of turtle shells or the markings on animal bones. Today we can marvel at these ancient practices as relics of a bygone era. But for the Shang, they were a way of life, a way of understanding the world around them and their place in it. They believed that everything was interconnected, that the natural world was alive with spirits, and that the human world was inextricably linked to the spiritual one. In a world where the line between the living and the dead was thin, the Shang kings and orators walked a tightrope between the two realms, seeking to keep the balance and ensure the harmony of their world. The Shang kings ruled from cities of packed earth walls. Their massive ramparts rose high, not of stone, but of rammed earth, pounded day after day by human hands. Day after day, year after year, The walls grew higher and wider, a laborious process of tamping and packing the soil until it hardened into a solid mass, layer upon layer. Within the walls, the nobles lived in grand wooden halls. Their finest residences might have 2 stories connected by a spiral staircase. Some rooms were for living, some for storage, some for sacrifice. Everywhere the aroma of roasting meat hung heavy in the air. For the Shang nobility were great hunters. When they tired of the chase, they could stroll through the city's many marketplaces, browse the stalls, piled high with goods from across the realm. Silk merchants from the south, bronze workers from the west, acrobats and jugglers from the east, storytellers and fortune-tellers from the north, all came to the Shang capital to trade their wares. Here the king's officials kept a sharp eye on the quality of goods sold throughout the city. They checked measures to ensure they were accurate, weights to make sure they were true. They even examined the silkworm's cocoons to see that the silk was of the finest quality. Life for the Shang nobility was a cycle of rituals. Every morning they woke with the sun. The first thing they did was light a ceremonial fire, then make offerings of grain and perhaps some live animals to the spirits of hearth and home. After that, it was time to dress, put on makeup, don the finest garments, and jewelry, anoint themselves with perfumes and scents, then ride in a chariot to the king's palace. There they attended to the king's needs, carried out his orders, and above all, kept him informed. If there was any trouble brewing in the empire, the king had to know about it. The nobles also served as judges, settling disputes between members of the court and the common people. Many of these disputes were over money. The Shang kings collected taxes from their subjects in the form of labor, grain, and manufactured goods, but if one of the king's subjects had a grievance, he could bring his case before the court. As judges, the nobles took their responsibilities seriously. They consulted the oracle bones to determine the best course of action. The Shang kings and nobles performed countless rituals every day, from sacrifices to the gods, to ancestor worship, to appeasement of the spirits. Theirs was a world of constant ceremony. At night, the nobles might dine in the king's great hall, sipping wine from long-spouted vessels and eating from heavy cold bronze platters. After dinner, they might listen to musicians play music on stone chimes and bronze bells. Each note rang slowly, vibrating through the great hall. The nobles would have worn fine clothes for the evening, perhaps even masks, and they may have danced to the music, twirling and leaping. Perhaps they simply walked slowly back and forth while the music swelled and faded. The music had no purpose, except to fill the vast space with sound, to remind the listeners that the world was in balance. Outside the palace walls, the fields stretched as far as the eye could see. From spring planting to summer growth to autumn harvest, the farmers worked the land. They grew millet and rice, raised pigs and cattle. They lived simple, hard lives, much like their ancestors had. For the Shang kings, the river and the soil were the real rulers. The king might sit on his throne and wear his crown, but his power depended on millet in the storehouses, rice in the paddies, and pigs in the pens. The king's power depended on the river's bounty and the soil's fertility. Without these things, he was nothing. As the centuries passed, more and more people came to live within the Shang kingdom. The cities grew larger and wealthier. The countryside became more productive. Each new generation prospered more than the last. At its greatest extent, the Shang Empire encompassed dozens of city-states. Together, they formed a huge trading network that extended beyond the borders of China. By the end of the Shang dynasty, however, the prosperity was over. The Shang kings had become weak and decadent. The river ran slow and still. The night in a Shang city was quiet. Torches flickered. Dogs barked in the distance. The stars turned overhead, slow, unhurried, eternal. High on a terrace above the city, 2 men sat wrapped in furs, their faces half hidden in the shadows. They were astrologers, and they had been watching the heavens for weeks. Now one of them, the younger one, spoke in a voice tight with frustration. "No answer," he said. "The sky gives us nothing." The older man remained silent, his eyes fixed on the distant stars. Finally he turned his head. His eyes, dark with age, seemed to hold the wisdom of the ages. "The river does not hurry," he said, "yet it reaches the sea. The archer does not hurry, yet his arrow finds its mark. The king does not hurry, yet his rule endures. Why should we hurry? The young man frowned, then looked away. He too was a king, the king of Shang, to be precise, Wu Ding, and he was indeed in a hurry. His great rival, the king of Zhou, was growing stronger. Sooner or later, he would attack. And King Wu Ding needed guidance, a sign from heaven, anything to tell him how to win. But the only answer the sky gave was the endless turning of the stars. Like any king, Wu Ding wanted quick answers, decisive action. He repaced his palace, unable to sit still, so unlike his counselors who studied the patterns of the stars for weeks on end, he could not bear even a moment's uncertainty. In his haste, he consulted all manner of diviners, those who read the shapes of turtle shells or the flight of birds, even those who listened to the whispers of the wind. Some told him to attack immediately. Others said he must wait. Some said he would win. Others said he would surely lose. But none could give him guidance beyond a year or two, and his rival was gathering strength for a decade. What good was that? One night, when the moon was full, King Wu Ding summoned his counselors. "I have waited long enough," he said.
I want to know what will happen, not next month or next year, but in the years to come, many years.
The old astrologer looked at him, his face grave. "My king, you ask the heavens a hard question. You wish to see far into the future, but the sky gives no easy answers. Come, stand by me here on the terrace. Look into the south and tell me what you see." Wu Ding rose and went to the railing. At first he saw nothing but darkness. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the gloom, he made out a faint glow on the horizon, like the reflection of a distant campfire. "What is that?" he asked. "That," said the old astrologer, "is your dynasty. Look now to the north." Wu Ding turned and saw another glow, bright and clear, like the rising sun. "And that?" he asked. "That is your rival. He is strong, and he grows stronger. But look again to the east." Dan saw yet another light, faint at first, but growing brighter by the year. "That," said the astrologer, "is your future. It is not for you to hurry it. It is for you to tend the fires of your dynasty and let the river run its course." And so the Shang endured for centuries. Their kings prayed to ancestors. Their scribes carved questions into bones. Farmers bent over the earth. Their musicians struck slow notes on bronze bells. A dynasty built not on speed, but on repetition. Each act repeated, year after year, until each step became second nature and the whole way of life. The river flowed, the fires burned, the dynasty lived. The Shang gave way to the Zhou. It did not happen in a single day or in a single battle. It happened slowly, over years, as new rulers rose and old ones fell. And when the Zhou spoke of their right to rule, they did not claim power by force alone. They claimed it through an idea that would echo through Chinese history for thousands of years. It was called the Mandate of Heaven. The mandate was simple, yet vast. It said that rulers governed only because heaven allowed it. Heaven was not a person, nor a god with a face. It was the balance of the world, the endless sky, the order of things. If a ruler was just, heaven would grant peace and harvest. If a ruler was corrupt, heaven would withdraw its favor. The signs were clear: floods, droughts, rebellions, or famine. In this way, heaven spoke without words. It is hard to say exactly when the Shang lost the mandate of heaven, but most agreed that it began when the last Shang king, the Edict King, took the throne. He was a troubled ruler, the product of a troubled house. His grandfather, the former king, had murdered his way to the throne, killing the Shang heir apparent. Then the grandfather had been murdered by his own son, who took the throne. Now the son was dead, and the throne had passed to the grandson. The Edict King was haunted by a palace full of ghosts, and he knew that his people saw him as an illegitimate ruler. To quiet their doubts, he built 2 lavish tombs for his father and grandfather, hoping to appease their restless spirits. But this only fed the flames of discontent. Each expensive burial was a reminder of the heavy taxes that the Shang dynasty had imposed on their people. And so the seeds of rebellion were sown. Across the empire, the people suffered. There was a great drought, and the farmland withered. The fields there was famine, and in the cities there was hunger. This is when a wandering scholar named Wu, she came upon a peach orchard and saw a wondrous sight. A lone peach tree laden with fruit in the midst of a withered landscape, and under its shade sat an old man reading a scroll. Wu, she approached and asked the old man for some fruit. The old man smiled and picked a juicy peach, then handed it to Wu. As the scholar bit into the fruit, he noticed a small mark, like a birthmark, hidden among the fuzz. Then the old man spoke. He told Wu Shay that he was descended from the Edict King's uncle, the rightful heir to the throne. And this peach pit, he said, bore the mark of kingship. Wu Shay listened intently. It too felt the oppressive weight of the Shang's misrule. So when the old man offered him the chance to overthrow the king and restore the rightful heir to the throne, Wu, she joined him, and together they raised an army. They marched south to the capital and confronted the Shang forces, defeating them in battle. Wu Shi then presented the peach pit to the people as proof of his lineage and right to rule. But the people saw through him. They had suffered too much under the Shang to trust a new dynasty founded on empty claims. Besides, what proof did a peach pit hold? What authority did it give? Only the mandate of heaven could legitimize a new ruler, and Wu, she had none of that. Though he won the battle, he lost the throne. But something had shifted. The mandate of heaven was a fragile thing, dependent on the virtue of the ruler and the will of the people. The Shang had lost both, though they held on to power for another century. They were a shadow of their former selves. Their decline had begun. When the Zhou finally took the throne, they celebrated with a grand feast. The king took the opportunity to bestow titles on those who had helped him win the war, including Wu Shi, whose rank was elevated. Wu Shi was overjoyed. Finally, he thought, my place in the dynasty is secure. But when he looked around the hall at the other nobles, he noticed something troubling. Many of them bore the marks of their previous masters, tattoos and shaved heads, the uniform of the Shang. How could he be sure that they had abandoned the old ways? How could he know that they were truly on the side of the new dynasty? The king noticed his troubled look and asked, "Why do you seem so unhappy? You have gained great honor today. Surely you have nothing to fear." "Wu," she replied, "I am honored, my lord, but I see these men who fought for the Shang now fighting for you. How can I know that they have switched sides? How can I know that they are not playing the part of loyal ministers while secretly plotting for their old master's return?" The king considered this, then gave Wu Shi an enigmatic smile. "You need not worry," he said, "for I, too, have wondered about the loyalty of my ministers. But I need only look to the mandate to know where their true allegiances lie. For if heaven favors me, then all will be well." And so the mandate of heaven became the foundation of the Zhou dynasty. Heaven was the ultimate arbiter of right and wrong, good and evil, and when the Zhou ruled in accordance with its will, they enjoyed the fruits of the mandate, a prosperous realm, and a long dynasty. But when they strayed from the path of righteousness, the mandate could be taken away. And so the Zhou kings always walked a tightrope between heaven and earth, trying to win the favor of the one and the loyalty of the other. So let's get this straight. The Zhou kings ruled from their capital with this belief as their foundation. But they could not rule alone. They entrusted land to nobles, each one responsible for their own territory. This was the feudal system. Slow, layered, repetitive. A lord received grain from farmers, sent tribute to the king, and offered loyalty in return. Beneath him, peasants plowed the soil, sowed seeds, and harvested the grain. From farmer to lord, from lord to king, from king to heaven, the cycle turned. Life in the Zhou world was ordered by rituals. At dawn, incense smoke rose in temple courtyards. Offerings of wine were poured into bronze vessels, their surfaces carved with swirling patterns of dragons and clouds. The vessels were heavy, meant not for comfort, but for solemnity. When bells were struck, they rang with long, low notes. The sound was not hurried, it lingered. It filled the halls and faded slowly into silence. But look at that river down there. Doesn't that look like a highway to you? Those are chariots racing along a 100-mile-an-hour road. That's right, it's China. And here the pace of life is not slow and steady, but fast, intense, and competitive. So how did the Chinese go from these leisurely, ritualistic beginnings to the hustle and bustle of the modern age. Well, we can start with the last king of the Shang dynasty. His name was Jifa, and he wasn't exactly a model ruler. He liked to party, but his taste in music was refined. He enjoyed composing elegant tunes played on the zither, a plucked string instrument. One day he invited the leading nobles to a concert in the palace gardens. He had them seated around him on finely woven mats. Then he began to play. The nobles watched him carefully. They knew the king well enough to sense that he was composing as he went along. He was playing to please them, to show off his skills. But what was the piece about? Was it a love song? A war march? What did it mean? Of course, they couldn't ask him. But the next morning, when the sun rose over the eastern mountains, they heard the answer. There it was again, the zither music from the night before. Only now it was being played by court musicians as part of a larger ensemble. And as the music filled the courtyard, servants appeared carrying vessels of wine and grain. The king's message was clear. His music was a metaphor for the dynasty. Just as a good composition required many parts to come together, so too did the prosperity of the Shang rely on each noble doing their part. If they failed, the whole thing would fall apart. In other words, don't be disloyal, don't rebel. Work together, and everything will be fine. The nobles took the message to heart. Sure, they had plenty of opportunity to rebel. The Shang kings left the countryside relatively unguarded, focusing instead on building up their cities. But after King Wu's death, trouble did arrive. His successor, King Zhou, proved to be weak and ineffective. Soon the nobles grew tired of waiting for competent leadership. They launched a rebellion, deposed the king, and replaced him with someone more to their liking, namely themselves. And so the Zhou dynasty began, named after the most powerful rebel, a man called King Wu. But the old Shang dynasty didn't just disappear. Its culture blended with that of the Zhou, creating something new. The Shang were known for their beautiful bronzes, but the Zhou took the art form to new heights. Their pieces were bigger, more numerous, and more detailed than ever before. They became famous for their elaborate designs depicting scenes from mythology, history, and daily life. But while the Zhou kings legitimized their rule with grand ceremonies, they also consolidated their power with an efficient bureaucracy. They established a new capital at Chengdu and divided the kingdom into 18 smaller administrative units, each under the control of a duke. These officials served at the king's pleasure. They were promoted based on merit and could be removed or demoted if they didn't perform well. It was a clever way to govern a large and diverse population. Yet despite all this organization, the Zhou world was still deeply unequal. At the top sat the king and his nobles, then came the rich landowners, merchants, and artisans. And at the bottom were the peasants, who did most of the work, but received very little of the profit. The system favored the wealthy, those with special skills or connections, and anyone who could pass the civil service exams. But even if you started out poor, your situation was not hopeless. There were plenty of opportunities to advance provided you were willing to work hard and play the game. After all, the Zhou world was a meritocracy. Everyone had the potential to succeed, which meant everyone had something to lose. And in this highly stratified society, where everyone's status depended on everyone else's cooperation, loyalty was a very big deal. In villages, peasants lived by the same rhythm. They woke with the sun, worked until dusk, and ended their days with meals of millet or rice. They bowed to their ancestors, lighting small lamps, placing food before tablets of wood. Even in the smallest hut, the ritual continued. It was a thread that bound the great king to the poorest farmer. The Zhou also cherished music. Not the fast, playful songs of festivals, but music of harmony. Sets of bells, tuned carefully, were struck in sequence. The tones aligned with the seasons, the elements, the balance of nature. To them, music was not merely sound. It was order made audible. Each note was the world in balance. Each pause was the silence of heaven. They believed that long ago, the spirits of heaven and earth had come together in perfect harmony at the creation of the world. And so they sought to capture that balance in their art, in their lives, in their very being. Music was the highest form of this. The king, like his subjects, would start his day with ancestral rituals, though his might be grander in scale. He, too, would dine on simple food, though his table might groan under the weight of offerings.
Once a year, during the grand ceremony of the king's day, the king donned the garments of the previous ruler, a tangible link to past and future. He walked a path strewn with the emblems of his lineage, each step echoing with the footsteps of his ancestors.
Then he conducted the most important ritual of all, the ancestral sacrifice. This was not just a ceremony, it was a conversation with the past. The king, acting as the current head of the family, discussed matters with his forefathers, asking for their blessings, sharing news of the kingdom. He offered them wine, food, precious metals, anything to ensure their favor. In return, the ancestors were believed to impart their wisdom, guiding the king on matters of state. It was a dialogue that transcended generations, a pact that ensured the continuation of the dynasty. For the Zhou, life was a cycle, a series of repeating patterns as eternal as the universe itself. Summer followed spring, as life followed death. Yin gave way to yang, as the moon waxed and waned. Even the king, despite his vast power, was subject to these rhythms. He too had to nourish his fields, watch his crops grow, offer thanks for a bountiful harvest. He too had to contend with the changing seasons, the unpredictable weather, the relentless march of time. But within this cycle, there was an order, a harmony that connected all things. And it was this harmony that the Zhou king sought to preserve. They saw themselves as the link between heaven and earth, the embodiment of the balance that permeated all of existence. When they performed their rituals correctly, when they lived in accordance with the rhythms of nature, they believed they were in tune with the will of heaven. But if they strayed from this path, if they forgot their duties or neglected their offerings, they risked upsetting the balance, inviting chaos into the world. Maintaining this balance was not just the king's responsibility, it was everyone's duty. The Zhou dynasty was the longest lasting in Chinese history, not because of any single factor, but because of the cumulative effect of many small things. The emphasis on ancestral piety, the importance of music and poetry, the focus on education, and the role of virtuous women all contributed to the dynasty's longevity. They are like notes of a song, each playing a part in creating a harmonious whole. As the centuries passed, the Zhou dynasty reached its peak. Its kings ruled over a vast and prosperous empire. The mandate of heaven was theirs, and the echoes of their power resonated throughout the land. But even at the height of their glory, they knew that their task was not easy. The balance they so carefully maintained was fragile, and it required constant care. For the Zhou, the secret to a long and prosperous life lay in living in harmony with the rhythms of the universe. And as long as they honored this, they believed they could maintain the balance, ensuring the continuation of their dynasty and the prosperity of their people. This is the story of the collapse of a world. For centuries, the Zhou world held together like this, steady, ordered, ritualized. The king at the center held the mandate of heaven, the divine right to rule. Below him, a hierarchy of nobles, each controlling their piece of the empire, keeping it stable. Everything was interconnected. The rituals, the sacrifices, the laws, the taxes, the military service. But slowly, the balance began to shift. The nobles grew stronger. Kings grew weaker. The mandate of heaven still ruled in theory, but in practice, many lords acted on their own. They fought amongst themselves, defied the king, made their own laws, raised their own armies. The king's court became a place of intrigue. Nobles plotted against one another. Conspiracies flourished. Usurpation and regicide were common. A noble might seize power in the capital, only to be ousted by another. Then the cycle would start again. Boy, what happened to the social order? Why did this seemingly stable system implode? Well, that's what we're going to find out today. In the 7th century BCE, the Zhou king was in trouble. His own brother had rebelled. Now he was hiding for his life. He fled to the state of Chen and asked for help. But Chen was a vassal state. It had its own interests. Besides, why should they care about the Zhou king? He wasn't a threat to them, so they turned him down. So the king tried again. He went to the state of Sai. Same thing. They weren't interested. And so he kept moving from state to state until he arrived at the border of Song. This time, he was successful. King Huan of Song welcomed him and gave him an army to put down the rebellion. With the help of Song, the Zhou king crushed the rebellion and re-established control over the capital. But it was a hollow victory. The king had lost his power. Nobles now controlled everything. And the worst part was, he knew that there was nothing he could do about it. The king was still the king, but his authority was now purely symbolic. And this wasn't an isolated case. Across the empire, similar power struggles were taking place. The states were becoming independent. They minted their own coins, built their own temples, made their own alliances. Soon the Zhou kings would come to rule only a small part of the empire around the capital. The rest would be lost forever. And yet, despite all the changes, the belief in the mandate of heaven remained strong. Every ruler who came after would claim it. Every rebellion would justify itself with it. Heaven's silence spoke louder than armies. People were still bound to the old ways, the rituals, the sacrifices, the ancestral worship. Even the most radical reformers would pay lip service to the mandate of heaven. They might overthrow a corrupt lord, but they wouldn't overthrow the system. That wasn't an option. To do that would be to invite chaos, to bring the empire back into the so-called warring states period. And everyone knew that such a thing would be unthinkable. Heaven gave, and it took away. The people, whether in palace or field, lived their lives beneath its watchful, invisible gaze. In the end, the Zhou dynasty lasted for over 800 years. It was longer than any other dynasty before or after. How did they do it? Well, the secret, I think, lies in their flexibility. The Zhou were able to adapt their rituals and traditions to local customs. They incorporated foreign gods into their pantheon. They absorbed new ideas and beliefs. In fact, some scholars argue that the very concept of the mandate of heaven was a later invention designed to justify the rule of the first emperor. When the Zhou ruled, and even after their power began to fade, something quiet and lasting was taking shape. It was not forged in bronze or carved in stone. It was brushed onto bamboo, line by line, character by character. It was the written word. In the earliest days, writing had been carved into bones, into shells, into the surface of bronze. But these were heavy, unyielding things. They could not carry long stories. They could not hold the words of teachers or the lessons of ages. So people turned to bamboo. Picture a strip of bamboo, cut smooth, polished until the surface was pale and clean. Onto this surface, a scholar dipped his brush. The brush was soft, made from animal hair, bound to a stick of bamboo. It met the inkstone where a solid block of black ink was ground slowly against wet stone. Over and over, until the liquid darkened. Grinding ink was not a quick act. It was patient, meditative, unhurried. Only then could the writing begin. At first, there were few to read the words, fewer still who could write them. Scholars treasured these characters like jewels, each one precious and rare. But as centuries passed, more and more people learned to read and write. More scrolls were produced, more books copied, until at last, just as the Zhou dynasty had spread the written word across its domain, so too did its written language take root in hearts and minds, becoming part of the very fabric of China. Writing gave people the power to shape the formless, to capture the fleeting, to preserve what might otherwise be lost. Now that the Zhou kings had lost control of their realm, writing became an even more vital tool for holding on to the past, for connecting with the future. Scholars sought out ancient texts, trying to piece together the lost history of their people. And as they uncovered the stories of their ancestors, they found inspiration for how to live. Across the land, people wrote down their own histories, their family stories, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Some stories were epic tales of adventure and daring deeds, like the story of Qi, a legendary warrior who led his people to victory in battle. Or the story of Dau, who tamed the floods and brought order to the world. Other stories were sadder about heroes whose brilliance could not overcome their own weaknesses, like the story of King Gujian, who, though he led his people to prosperity, could never forget his humiliation at the hands of his enemies, or the story of Bao Shuja, whose wise counsel was rejected, whose warnings were ignored until his lord was brought low by his own hubris. These stories and many, many more were passed down through the ages, traveling from town to town, from village to village, until at last they were collected and written down in a single book. A book of songs. Songs about love and loss, about hope and fear, about the joys and sorrows of the human experience. This book became known as the Shi Jing, or the Book of Songs, and it was considered the first great work of Chinese literature. Within these pages, you would find echoes of older, unwritten stories, as well as brand new tales, all woven together with the same thread. As the Zhou dynasty faded, a new dynasty rose to power. But despite the changing times, the written word endured. It lived on, not just in books, but in everyday life. Characters were painted on walls to ward off evil spirits. Amulets were inscribed with protective words. Seals stamped with official characters were hung on doors to show that the emperor himself had bestowed them. Even coins were imprinted with words and numbers. And all the while, people continued to write, to record their history, to document their discoveries, to capture their experiences. The written word became an essential part of Chinese culture, was a way to understand the past, a tool to shape the present, and a key to the future. The scholar held the strip with care. With slow strokes, he painted the characters. Each one was more than a mark. Each one carried meaning, history, connection. A single line might mean river. A single curve might mean heaven. The strips of bamboo were tied together with cords, one after another, until they formed a roll. When unrolled, the roll revealed a text, a law, a poem, a teaching. But bamboo was heavy and fragile, and yet this was the way knowledge moved. Scrolls passed from teacher to student, from father to son, from court to court. A world written, carried carefully in bundles of wood. Learning was slow. Children sat cross-legged before their teachers, repeating the characters out loud. Their voices were soft, chanting, rhythmic. Over and over they spoke, until the characters became part of their memory. A boy might spend days just learning to copy a single phrase with his brush. The ink would run thin, the bamboo would stain, but the lesson endured. This is a history that feels almost forgotten. In an age of Google searches and viral videos, it's hard to imagine a time when looking up a fact meant consulting a massive book, a scroll, and even before that, hand-carved wooden blocks. It's hard to imagine a time when the act of writing was so central, so reverent, so sacred. Not just because it was hard, but because each stroke, each character bore witness to countless others who had written it before. These wooden blocks are among the earliest examples of writing. They date back thousands of years to a time when there were no paper or scrolls or even papyrus. These blocks are pieces of a history that feels almost mythical. Each block is like a piece of a puzzle. The edges fit together to make a larger picture, a larger story. These are pieces of the past, but they also tell us something about the present. They tell us where our stories come from. When I look at these blocks, I see echoes of the past and the present. I see the way that ideas move from one place to another, from one person to the next. I see how stories shape our understanding of the world and how they connect us to the people who came before us. One of the most important things about these blocks is that they show us that we are not the first people to have asked these questions. The questions that we ask today, the questions that keep us up at night, questions that drive our curiosity. These are questions that people have been asking for thousands of years. I imagine a young student sitting cross-legged before his teacher, trying to make sense of the world by carving his questions into wooden blocks. I imagine the teacher patiently guiding him, helping him to understand the world around him. I imagine the two of them sitting in silence, lost in thought, each with a block in hand. These blocks are more than just pieces of wood. They are pieces of a conversation that has been going on for thousands of years. They are a reminder that we are part of something bigger than ourselves, that we are connected to the past in ways that we can't always see. They say that a society is defined by the questions it asks. If that's true, then these questions are the foundation of our society. They are the questions that have shaped our history, that have driven our progress, that have made us who we are today. So the next time you find yourself lost in the endless scroll of online content, I want you to remember these questions. Remember the questions that have driven humanity forward. Remember the questions that have made us who we are. And remember that you, too, are part of this ancient conversation. You, too, are part of this endless quest for knowledge. The great dynasties of ancient China had many tools of power. Soldiers to enforce the laws, mandarins to collect the taxes, and an elaborate system of roads to move their armies and their goods. But perhaps the most important tool of all was the humble writing brush. For the scholars who wielded them, writing was more than communication. It was a way of preserving order. Every law, every ritual, every record of land and tribute could be written down. And once written, it could be kept. A dynasty could forget a king, but it could not forget what was written on bamboo. In quiet rooms, clerks bent over their desks, copying texts by lamplight. The brush whispered across the surface. A drop of ink fell slowly, spreading like water in sand. They worked not for glory, but for permanence. Line after line, scroll after scroll. The bureaucracy of an empire carried not in speeches, but in strokes of ink. And in time, writing became not only practical, but beautiful. Calligraphy was an art, the balance of strokes, the harmony of lines. To write well was to bring calm, to reveal order. The brush did not rush. It moved as the breath moved, steady, measured, unhurried. So much of ancient China was written this way, on bamboo and ink, with patience. The Chinese writing brush is an ancient invention, but its history is shrouded in myth. Legend has it that writing began with the oracle bones, the shoulder blades of oxen used by priests to divine the future. By inscribing questions onto the bones and then placing them into a fire, the priests would read the cracks as messages from the gods. When the Shang dynasty fell and the Zhou dynasty rose, writing evolved from oracle to edict. The kings used scribes to record their lineage and their laws to keep order among their people. Bamboo and silk became the preferred materials, and writing spread from palaces to marketplaces, from temples to taverns. Despite its humble appearance, the writing brush was an expensive tool. It was made from the softest part of a particular kind of bamboo, carefully stripped and honed. And the finest brushes were prized possessions, passed down through families, or given as gifts to scholars. Ink was also expensive, made from the soot of burnt hemp. Paper was rare, so the early Chinese practiced a kind of recycling, using old scrolls as window screens or wrapping cloths. Writing was an expensive habit, but the cost was considered worth it because writing was power. It was a way to preserve knowledge, to pass it down through generations. As the Han Dynasty grew, so did the number of scholars. There were official schools where students could learn the classics, but most of the time learning was done alone. A student might spend years copying a master's text, making sure to memorize the order of each stroke. In the Song Dynasty, a scholar might live in a small cottage, surrounded by books and scrolls, waiting for a government position that might never come. But even without power, the scholar could find a kind of peace. The philosopher Lao Tzu wrote about it. He said, "Those who contemplate the mysteries of heaven and earth will see the course of all things. He who knows the underlying unity of all things is superior to the man of letters." In the 7th century, the Buddhist monk Yejing traveled across Asia, collecting sacred texts. He was a master of calligraphy, and he wrote, "When the mind is free from distractions and has nothing to cling to, when the spirit is not forced to follow any fixed rule, then the brush can express what the eye sees and the mind thinks." The art of calligraphy reached its zenith during the Song Dynasty. The greatest masters could write thousands of characters a day, and their works were displayed like paintings in the homes of wealthy merchants. One of them, the poet Su Shi, wrote about his craft. When the pen is used in moderation, it can express the writer's feelings. When overused, it becomes a mere show of technique. Another master, Mifu, was even more direct. If you want to grow your skill, stop thinking about growing your skill. Let your mind be empty when you sit down to write. Today, calligraphy is still taught in Chinese schools, though now it is taught alongside typing and word processing. But for thousands of years, it was the main way that the Chinese recorded their history, their laws, and their literature. It was the way they communicated across the distances of their great empire. It was the way they brought order to the world. It was the way they made sense of themselves. So much of ancient China was written this way, on bamboo and ink, with patience. When kingdoms struggled, and when the Zhou grew weak, voices rose to ask, how should people live? How should families behave? How should rulers rule? Among these voices was one that never shouted. It spoke with patience, with order, with gentle insistence. That was the voice of Confucius. Confucius was not a king, not a general, not a man of wealth. He was a teacher, walked from court to court, offering his lessons, hoping to guide rulers toward virtue. Many did not listen, but his words endured. His way was not the way of force. It was the way of ritual, the way of harmony, the way of patience. At the heart of his teaching was one simple truth: every person has a place. A son must honor his father, a younger brother must respect his elder, a subject must obey his ruler, a ruler must act with benevolence toward his subjects. In this chain of duty, there was no end. It stretched from the smallest hut to the highest throne. He is one of the most important figures in human history, one of the first great teachers of a new kind of morality, universal, rational, compelling. His impact on China was immediate and profound. For centuries, his followers competed with other schools of thought for influence over the rulers of China. They lost against the legalists who imposed harsh laws and punishments, and for a time imposed their way on China. But after the fall of the Qin dynasty, the Confucian way returned. It became the guiding light of Chinese civilization. And the effect on China was so profound that it has been called the Chinese Renaissance. It lasted for 185 years, from the Han Dynasty to the end of the Western Han period. During this golden age, China flourished. The arts and sciences blossomed. Trade expanded along the Silk Road. The Great Wall was built. Many of the foundations of Chinese society were laid during this era. And all of this happened under the banner of the Confucian way. But Confucius was not just a teacher. He was also a philosopher. He pondered the mysteries of life and death. He left us with some of the deepest reflections on humanity and existence. Listen now to his words. The master said, "When a man travels a path of 1,000 miles, his food and his lodging are a great affair. If he has provisions and a blanket, he is content. Whether he reaches his journey's end or not, he is quite indifferent." What does this mean? What is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of a long journey? Is it just to get to the end? Confucius says the point is in the journey itself. It is in the eating, the walking, the meeting of people along the way. This is what makes life worth living. This is what he means by saying, don't be full of prejudice, for then you will not learn. We must keep our minds open. It's only then can we learn something new. If we think we already know everything, how can anything new enter our minds? He also said real poverty is not the absence of possessions. Real poverty is the absence of values. When we have no principles, no sense of right and wrong, no goals to strive for, no beauty to appreciate, then indeed we are poor. But if we live by strong values, then even in difficult times we are rich. And he said, "A superior man is like unto jade. Though he be somewhat damaged, he is not altogether destroyed. Rub him up and polish him well, and he will become a vessel for the sovereign to use." Our potential is unlimited. Even if we make mistakes, if we are corrupted by the world, we can always start again. We can always improve ourselves. So these are the words of Confucius, a teacher who changed the course of history.
Ow.
Do they not also speak to you? Do they not apply to your life today? You and I live in very different times. Our world is vastly different from that of Confucius. Yet at the deepest level, we are all the same. We all seek happiness. We all seek fulfillment. We all seek meaning in our lives. This is why the message of Confucius is so timeless. It speaks to the deepest longings of the human soul. There's this one story from the time of Confucius that I love. So let me set the scene for you. Imagine a small village in the time when Confucius lived. At dawn, a son bows to his father before setting out to the fields. At dusk, a daughter carries water to her mother, kneeling before serving. Meals are taken in silence until the eldest begins to eat. Every act is ordered. Every gesture is a ritual. The ritual is not empty. It is a reminder that each person belongs to something larger. Confucius also taught the power of ceremony. At weddings, at funerals, at festivals, the rituals were long, precise, deliberate. They involved bowing, kneeling, offering food, pouring wine. They were not rushed. They were not hurried. Each movement was slow, graceful, exact. Through them, people felt connected to their ancestors, to their family, to their community, to heaven itself. Now, you might be thinking, who has time for all this? This sounds complicated, seems unnecessary. But Confucius believed that these rituals weren't just traditions. They were a way of connecting to something bigger than ourselves, a way of honoring the past, a way of building character, he said. The person who is destined to come after me will find it easy to rule over the empire, where I can just sit in my place and let things settle down. Why? Because what I have done is to make the people love the right thing. Now, how does he do this? Well, through teaching. He travels around the states, advising rulers, trying to get them to understand the importance of these rituals, the importance of tradition, the importance of passing on a culture that is rich with meaning. But it's not just about the rituals. Confucius also taught the power of music. He believed that music could inspire, uplift, and heal. And so he composed pieces that expressed his teachings, that captured the emotions of his people. Imagine a young student sitting in front of his master. Master's Confucius, and the student asks a question that has been bothering him. He says, "Master, why do we have to be so careful with our words? Why can't we just speak our minds?" And Confucius replies, "Because our words can have power. They can influence others. They can either build up or tear down. A careless word can hurt someone deeply, even if it wasn't meant that way. Our words should be like the words of a funeral. Obey the rules, follow the tradition, express what needs to be expressed, and in doing so, honor the feelings of others." And the student pondered these words, realizing that true wisdom lay not just in speaking the truth, but in speaking it with care, with empathy, with understanding. And as I pondered these stories, I thought to myself, why do we even bother with all this stuff? What's the point of all these rituals and traditions and ceremonies? And then it hit me. The point is connection. All these rituals, they connect us to something bigger than ourselves. They connect us to our ancestors, to our culture, to our values. They give us a sense of belonging, a sense of identity. In a world that is constantly changing, it is comforting to have something that is constant, something that is unchanging. And that's what these rituals are, a link to the past, a bridge to the future. Confucius said, "The purpose of life is not to be wealthy or powerful, but to be a good human being." And these rituals, they embody that idea. They remind us of what is important, to be kind, to be respectful, to be compassionate. So the next time you find yourself in a situation where you have to observe one of these rituals, don't just go through the motions. Don't just do it because it's a tradition. Take a moment to appreciate the deeper meaning behind it, the message from the past that is still relevant today. Did you know that this man is one of the most influential people of all time? He has inspired millions and led several revolutions. His words are in the back of many an English dictionary. But this man never wrote anything down. He never even held a pen. He taught 3,000 years ago in China. And his teachings were gathered by his students, written down on bamboo strips, passed from hand to hand. His words weren't dramatic. They weren't quick. They were steady, patient, repetitive, like a river that wears away stone. They said, "Respect your elders, care for your parents, honor your teachers, keep your word, do not rush, do not waste, be calm." In a world of chaos and noise, his words cut through. Over the centuries, they spread far and wide. They shaped villages, courts, laws, and even the smallest family gatherings. They became known as the 5 relationships, the foundation of the gentle way. And that's how we got the title of today's episode, The Harmony of Order. In today's episode, we explore the origins of Confucianism. Did you know that? As a kid, he was already considered a master. By age 19, he was teaching other young men. By age 30, he had his own school. It was crowded with students from all over China. He didn't have much to show them, no fancy robes or treasures. His house was small, often filled with the smell of stale urine. But he had something better than all of those things. He had an answer. He could answer any question on history, poetry, music, rituals. He could find the right words for every occasion. His students called him the master. And he had a gift for making the ancient feel new, showing how the past could be a guide for the present. So they listened carefully to what he had to say. After his death, his teachings continued to spread. For centuries, scholars argued over his words. They debated and discussed until they formed a system, a way to run a nation, to raise children, to serve one's country. They made sure everyone knew about the 5 relationships. Parents should be respected by their children, elders by the young. Teachers must be honored by their students. Friends should be trustworthy, and everyone must be ruled by the wise and virtuous. That's how the master shaped the society. Through each of us, our actions affect others. Every parent, every student, every citizen can contribute to the harmony of the whole. He also taught about the importance of rituals, not the kind with fancy clothes and expensive gifts, but simple acts to show respect and care. Bowing to show you see someone, lighting incense to honor your ancestors, taking time to copy his words by lamplight. It's the little things that make the big difference. Behave correctly towards others, and they will behave correctly towards you. And as more and more people follow the right path, the entire society will become harmonious. Imagine a big city with millions of people rushing around, each focused only on themselves, their own needs, their own desires. What would happen? There would be so much noise, so much chaos, so much waste. But then along comes the master with his quiet teachings, reminding everyone to slow down, to think about others, to be patient. It's like pouring water into a cup. First, fill the cup yourself, and then share with others. It may seem like a small thing, but it's actually huge. It makes society function. It makes the world a better place. He didn't just teach individuals. He also helped rulers understand their role. A king must set an example. A leader must be virtuous. If the ruler is unjust, how can they expect their subjects to be just? That's why the master always said, be the kind of leader you want to be led by. Only then can you create real harmony. It's hard to imagine, but for many years his teachings were almost forgotten. They were lost in the chaos of the 20th century. But in the 1970s, they were rediscovered, and people started to pay attention again. His words about respecting elders, caring for parents, honoring teachers, being honest in business, and treating everyone with respect. All of this became part of China's national identity. So the next time you open an English dictionary, take a moment to appreciate the wisdom of the master. The man who taught a nation how to dream of harmony, not the harmony of silence, not the harmony of submission, but the harmony of order. Each person in their place, each duty performed, each ritual repeated generation after generation. The world outside may be unpredictable, full of challenges and changes, but inside there can be calm. And sometimes, that's enough. The tribes of the Central Plains called him the first emperor. Before his time, China had been a loose collection of states, with their own customs, their own weights and measures, even their own scripts. But he changed all that. After centuries of division, after lords and kingdoms had quarreled and fought for more than a millennium, he would bind it all together. He was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, and with him China entered a new age. His dynasty would last only 150 years, but it was precise, efficient, orderly. The emperor brought order not through the words of harmony, but through laws, through standardization, through unification. He established a new capital in the east at Xiangyang. It became the political and cultural heart of the empire. From here he set about shaping his new domain. He sent out teams of inspectors to check on local officials, to make sure they were doing their jobs. He took a census of the population, registering every family and individual. He standardized weights and measures, coins, even the width of cartwheels so that every road bore the same grooves. Throughout the empire, the same coins were minted, round with a square hole in the center. In the markets, merchants no longer haggled over weights. A farmer in the south could trade using the same measures as a merchant in the north. Travel became easier and safer. Roads were repaired, and new ones were built. And along these roads, inns were established to provide food and lodging for travelers. Officials were set up to collect taxes and see to the needs of the people. But perhaps the most important change was in writing. Dozens of scripts, dozens of ways to write were gathered into one. One style, one form, one standard. A word written in one village could now be read in another. Communication was no longer local, it was imperial. In the 2,200 years since his death, the story of the first emperor has become a legend. His terracotta army, an astonishing find from a bygone era. Each soldier unique, yet part of a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. For Qin Shi Huang, order and efficiency were the highest values. He believed in the power of a centralized government run by educated officials, not by birth or wealth. He selected men for their skills, for their talents, and he rewarded them according to their achievements. Many of his reforms were copied from the state of Qin. In fact, he took the name Qin Shi Huang, meaning the first emperor. Before him, China had been a loose collection of states. He changed all that, waged war on the other states, and one by one, brought them under the rule of Qin. Then he established a centralized government with a bureaucracy to run it. And he divided the empire into provinces, which were then subdivided into counties, which were then subdivided into local districts. At the head of the government was the emperor, then officials appointed by the emperor. Below them were local magistrates, and over all of this, a vast network of spies and informants who reported any sign of trouble or disloyalty. He took the best features of the states that he conquered, and he used them to build up his own empire. He adopted the legalism of the state of Qin, the efficient bureaucracy of the state of Yan, the organizational skills of the state of Chut. He took what was good, and he discarded the bad. It was an age of great building projects, of creating, of organizing, of establishing. And from the palaces of the first emperor to the Great Wall of China, much of what was created has lasted for centuries. But while the dynasty might have been short, the impact of the first emperor was not. The very concept of China was new, an idea whose time had come, but it was he who made it real. His name was Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor. And all who came after, they built on what he started. They spread his ideas, his innovations, his reforms. Without him, there would have been no Han Dynasty, no Song, no Ming. The very idea of China was his idea. And that is why he is remembered as the first emperor. But for the people, life was still slow, still heavy with labor. Here's a history hot tip for you. When you think of ancient China, what comes to mind? The Great Wall snaking across deserts and mountains, maybe? Or an emperor with a terracotta army, perhaps? Well, those are just two of the many stories that make up Chinese history. Today we're going to explore one more. In this series, we bring you the stories of everyday life in the ancient world. So grab your sandals, pour yourself some wine, and join us as we travel back in time to ancient China. One day in the 3rd century BCE, a man shouldered his basket and walked out of the city. He joined a line of men, each carrying a basket, each walking toward a mountain. Together they climbed, carrying the weight of their labor up the stony path. At the top, a foreman checked off the baskets on a list, then sent them on their way. The men started down the other side of the mountain, their footsteps kicking up dust behind them. Soon the sound of their voices echoed in the valley. Stone by stone, men carried blocks to build walls. The Great Wall did not rise in a single sweep. It rose through endless repetition. A man lifts a stone. He places it down. Another lifts a stone. He places it down. Thousands, tens of thousands, across mountains and valleys, doing the same act again and again. The wall was not only a barrier of stone, it was a barrier built from patience, toil, and silence. After a few decades, the weight of the Qin's strict laws, their harshness broke the dynasty. But the Han that followed learned from them. The Han kept the standard measures, the coins, the writing, but they added gentleness. They built a system of officials, clerks, and scribes, a bureaucracy, quiet and vast. In the offices of the Han, the empire was not ruled by shouts. It was ruled by records. One clerk carefully dipped a brush into black ink. He traced lines and curves across a sheet of white paper, making characters that would hold the weight of the empire. When he finished, he rolled the paper, tied it with cord, and stamped it with a seal made of clay. It was one of countless documents produced by the empire's scribes, records that could move faster than any army. Across the empire, other clerks worked in the imperial kitchens, recording what went in and what went out, making sure there was enough grain to feed the empire's armies and its people. Other clerks worked in the fields alongside the peasants, teaching them new ways of planting rice and wheat. Some were sent to distant lands to record the number of people and the amount of grain in each county. All these records were collected in a central office, where the emperor's advisors sifted through them, looking for problems or signs of trouble. In the capital city, rows and rows of shelves held scrolls stacked carefully on top of each other, tied together with twine. Each shelf reached high into the building, holding hundreds of documents. As one clerk untied a bundle of scrolls, another stamped a new batch with seals, each one different. He dipped his brush into pools of ink, mixing black, blue, and red. The most important documents were stamped with the emperor's seal, a red circle with the Chinese characters for Han. Less important documents might be stamped with a green circle or a blue square. When the records for a region were complete, a messenger would take them to the capital. Along the way, he would stop at each county seat to pick up more records. Sometimes his horse would need to carry messages as well, so he would tie the bundles of bamboo slips to the horse's back and send them racing along the post roads. Put them in his own carriage and drive them to the next station. Like a relay race, the messages and records were passed from hand to hand, from place to place, moving through the empire like the blood in a living thing. The Qin had used records too, but for them, documents were weapons. They were used to keep track of who paid their taxes and who didn't, who followed the rules and who didn't. The Han used records in the same way. They also wanted to know how much grain each county had, how much silk, how much salt, even how many people there were. But for the most part, Han records were created to help the empire run smoothly, and instead of being weapons, they were tools. One day, the emperor sat in his palace reading a scroll. He looked up as a clerk entered the hall. The man bowed and said, "Your Majesty, the records are in. The western counties are doing well. There's been an earthquake in the western regions, but the people are recovering quickly." The emperor nodded, knowing that thanks to the clerks, the empire was in good hands. Every morning when the sun rose over the eastern mountains, a messenger would ride out from the capital city, a pouch of freshly inked scrolls secured behind him. Day after day, his horse's hooves struck the same ruts in the dirt roads. He rode through mountain passes as high as a bird could fly, and across rivers that flowed down from those mountains to the lowlands. He rode through busy villages and quiet ones too, the pulse of the empire thrumming beneath him like a second heartbeat. When he reached his destination, he would dismount, carefully unwrap the linen cords and deliver the scrolls into the waiting hands of an official. Then he would turn and ride back the way he came, back to the capital, and the endless cycle of writing and dispatching. That had begun before he was born and would continue long after he was gone. For the order of the empire traveled this way, word by word, scroll by scroll. It was a patient, even plodding way to rule such a vast and varied land. But it was a method that worked. And so the Han emperors sent their messages across the empire as the seasons turned and the years rolled by. And it wasn't just edicts and commands that traveled along these routes. The Han also valued learning. Scholars across the empire studied the texts of Confucius. They debated the meaning of the classics and memorized thousands of lines of poetry and prose. Some would travel to the capital to take examinations, hoping to be selected for government service. And those chosen would need to have the right answers ready in their minds at a moment's notice. So boys began their studies early, sitting in quiet rooms, often in the attics of their homes, memorizing texts line by line, repeating them until they filled their minds completely. There was no rushing, no shortcut, it's only repetition, only time. And beyond the bureaucracy, the empire stretched outward. Along the edges of the known world, trade routes wound westward, carrying silk and spices and jade and lacquerware to distant lands. Across the deserts, caravans moved step by step, their camels laden with the goods of the empire. At each oasis, the travelers would stop, open their ledgers, and unroll their scrolls of record. Here they would weigh the goods and collect the taxes due, and note the names of travelers and traders. Even here, far from the capital, the bureaucracy's ink kept pace with the sand and wind. The empire was vast and varied, unified yet brimming with differences. Its size alone was a source of pride for the Han people. To have created such order out of such wild terrain was a remarkable feat. The mountains were tamed by the roads that climbed their slopes. Rivers were bridged and followed to their sources. The emperor's commands, carried on the backs of messengers' horses, penetrated even the remotest villages. But what made the Han Dynasty truly great was not its size or its wealth or even its armies. It was the endurance of its empire. The Han endured for centuries, longer than the Qin, longer than the Zhou, longer than any dynasty that came before or would come after. Not because they were loud, not because they were swift, but because they were steady. Their empire lived in scrolls, in seals, in the quiet patience of clerks who copied line after line by lamplight. The sound of empire was not the clash of swords, but the whisper of brushes. It was the crackle of parchment. It was silence, ordered and enduring. While the emperors ruled with laws and scrolls, another way of life flowed quietly alongside. It was not about ritual, as Confucius taught. It was not about bureaucracy, as the Han practiced. It was about stillness. It was about the Tao, the way. Taoism began not in courts but in mountains and forests. Sages walked narrow paths among bamboo groves. They sat by streams, listening to the water. They watched clouds drift slowly across the sky. From silence, they drew their lessons. The Tao, they said, could not be forced. It could not be spoken, only lived. To follow the Tao was to live gently, without resistance, like water flowing around stones. A river never argues with a rock. It bends, it curves, it passes, and in time it shapes the stone itself. So should people live. So should rulers rule, without struggle, without force. In the sprawling cities, merchants hawked their wares. Peddlers walked from village to village. And in the fields, farmers tilled the soil and reaped the harvest. The wheel of life turned. The seasons shifted. The years passed. But always there was the mountain, silent, strong, unchanging. Always there was the stream, patient, clear, reflecting the sky. It is said that Lao Tzu was born a man, but he was more than that. He was a spirit of the mountains, a soul of the forest. His long white beard flowed like the waterfall. His eyes held the green of ancient trees. He roamed the countryside, a pouch on his back, a staff in his hand, walking into the sunset, disappearing into the clouds. And when people heard his name, they knew he was coming. Merchants put down their ledgers. Farmers left their fields. For a moment, the world was still. He spoke to them of a life untethered, of a path untrodden, of a way of being. He told them to follow the Tao. At first, his words were riddles. The Tao that can be spoken is not the Tao. He said the name for it is not the thing itself. To know it, you must let it go. You must empty your mind, be still. Only then will you hear the music of the spheres, the harmony of the universe. His disciples gathered around him, listening, learning, carrying his message to the world. Some lived in the mountains, far from the noise of men, seeking the Tao in solitude. Others walked among the people, sharing what they had learned, planting seeds of wisdom. They built small communities, simple and honest. Living in harmony with the Tao, temples were built to honor the old man, the sage of the mountains. Some became centers of learning, others, homes for the aged. Many served as way stations for travelers, weary from their journey. No matter who you are, what brings you here, you are welcome. Rest, Lao Tzu had said, for the journey is long. The world may clamor, the world may call, but here there is peace. There, you may find yourself. Over the centuries, Taoism grew. Its teaching spread, its influence grew. It shaped Chinese thought, Chinese art, Chinese life. Gardens, with their pools and rocks and trees, became a microcosm of the Tao. A place where stillness and movement, earth and sky, all came together in perfect balance. Calligraphy, too, was an expression of the Tao, each stroke of the brush, a dance of black ink on white silk, expressing the rhythm of the universe. When the Mongols rode across the land, when the Manchurians built their empire, when the communists came to power, Taoists were there, serving the people, healing the sick, teaching the young, keeping the flame of the Tao alive. Through thick and thin, through war and peace, the temple stood, silent testament to the power of stillness, a quiet reminder to those who enter, to those who pray, to those who seek. To be still and know that you are part of something bigger than yourself, part of the eternal flow, part of the Tao. They stood in gardens, arms raised to the sky, welcoming the sunrise, then slowly lowered as the moon ascended. Their breaths were quiet and controlled, echoing the rhythm of the cosmos. In this sacred space between inhale and exhale, they found a way to lengthen life and restore harmony. They were Taoists, followers of the Tao, the way of life, the path to enlightenment. Now, imagine you're standing in that garden. The wind whispers through the trees, rustling the leaves into a gentle wave. You raise your arms, feeling the sun's warm embrace on your skin. As you lower them, the coolness of the evening embraces you, and you feel the moon's soft glow all around. Your breath, it's not just air passing in and out. It's a connection to the eternal flow of the universe. But what exactly are these breathing exercises? How do they lead to longevity and harmony? And how can we incorporate them into our lives for a better, more balanced existence? These questions echoed in my mind as I delved deeper into the world of Taoism. In ancient China, nestled amidst the misty mountains and tranquil gardens, Taoism was born. It wasn't just a religion, it was a way of life, a philosophy, a path to enlightenment. For the Taoists, life was a journey to be lived in harmony with the Tao, the way of the universe. They saw the Tao as the source of all things, the endless, unnamable origin from which everything sprung and to which everything would return. It was the breath of the cosmos, the pulse of existence. Laozi, the old master, he who is believed to have authored the Tao Te Ching, was a pivotal figure in Taoism. He taught that the highest good is like water, nourishing all, yet taking the shape of the vessel into which it is poured. He taught that the way of the Tao is like that of water, always present, always flowing, always adapting, never forcing, yet everything embracing. His words were simple, yet profound, urging us to live in accordance with the Tao, to find our true nature and to cultivate virtues like compassion and humility. Zhuangzi, another central figure, he wove his philosophy into captivating stories. He spoke of a butterfly that dreams it as a bird and awakes to find itself still a butterfly, wondering if being a bird would be more delightful. Then there's the famous story of the fish. A big fish in a small pond was lamenting its fate. Small fish swam up and asked why. The big fish, irritated, said, "You wouldn't understand. I'm destined to swim in the boundless ocean, yet here I am stuck in this tiny pond." The small fish thought for a moment, then replied, "Perhaps you're wrong. Maybe this is the ocean you're destined for. How can you assume that being in a boundless ocean would be better than being in this small pond?" His words challenge our assumptions, reminding us that our perception shapes our reality. Zhuangzi's approach was like water, gentle yet penetrating, soft yet profound. He didn't just teach, he shared insights, allowing his audience to discover truths for themselves. The Taoist view of life is like a dance, a continuous flow, an interplay of opposites. They believed in embracing the natural cycles of life, the waxing and waning, the ebb and flow of energy. This dance is reflected in the Tai Chi, the symbol of Taoism, representing the dynamic balance between opposing forces like yin and yang, softness and hardness, action and stillness. It's a reminder that life isn't static. It's a continuous process of change and growth. In the heart of this philosophy lay the concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action. It's not about inactivity, but about aligning oneself with the Tao, acting in harmony with the natural order of the universe. Just as water flows around obstacles, Taoists aim to live in harmony with the world, not by forcing their way through, but by adapting to circumstances. The Taoist breathing exercises, they weren't just a means to an end, they were a way of life. They were a practice, a meditation, a connection to the eternal flow of the universe. Each inhale and exhale was a step towards balance, a breath of life in harmony with the cosmos. The Taoists believed that by practicing these exercises, one could tap into the vital energy of the universe. The Qi and direct it for health and longevity was about finding the rhythm of the cosmos within oneself and living in sync with it. As I continue my exploration into Taoist philosophy, I'm reminded of the interconnectedness of all things, the harmony of opposites, and the beauty of simplicity. The Taoist breathing exercises, they're not just a relic of the past, they're a living tradition that can enrich our lives today. They offer a path to balance, to health, and to a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. I invite you now to close your eyes and imagine a garden in Han times. The North Star is out tonight. Pine trees gently sway. A brook trickles over moss-covered stones. Somewhere a hermit sits cross-legged on a mat with a scroll in his lap. He does not read it, though. He sits there listening to the wind whispering through the pines, to the water gurgling over the stones, to the crickets chirping in the tall grass, to the silence of the night. In that silence, he hears the music of the spheres. In that silence, he finds more profound wisdom than in any court debate, more liberating clarity than in any law. When the master Lao Tzu stepped down from his high position as an official in the imperial court, he was urged by the emperor to write down his philosophy for the ruler and the people. Lao Tzu wrote the Tao Te Ching, but even after writing those 81 chapters, many of his disciples did not really understand what he had taught. They argued with each other about which dynasty was more enlightened and which ruler was more virtuous. So the master walked among them and said, "You are all wrong. You have misunderstood the point entirely. Go back to nature. Live in the moment. Stop chattering and start listening." Taoism taught that the world cannot be grasped tightly. It must be held lightly, like a leaf, like a feather, like a moment of breath. You try to grasp it, you try to hold it, you try to keep it, you try to conquer it, and it slips through your fingers. You lose it. Taoism taught that to let go is to gain. When you stop resisting, when you stop fighting, when you stop trying to change the world, when you stop trying to be someone else, when you stop trying to meet expectations, when you stop trying to be perfect, when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are, that's when you gain the world. That's when you find yourself in harmony with everything that is. So the Taoists lived gently, quietly, modestly, simply, peacefully. They did not seek power or fame or fortune. They did not seek to dominate or control or manipulate or exploit. They simply lived their lives in harmony with what is, with what was, with what would be. They found joy in every moment, gratitude in every breath, peace in every step they took, equanimity in every word they spoke. They were like water, like wind, like stone. They were formless and timeless, shapeless and boundless, empty and full. They were free. Now, empires rose and fell. Rome wasn't built in a day, nor was it destroyed in a day. The Han Dynasty was one of China's golden ages, but even its foundations were laid long before, and its decline began long before. Other dynasties rose and fell, armies marched, and rivers flooded, but Taoism endured. It was never in a hurry. It never sought to conquer. It never sought to win at any cost. It simply waited, like water, like wind, like stone. And in that waiting, it gained the world, because to hold on to something, to try to keep it, to try to conquer it, is to lose it. But to let go, to relax into it, to harmonize with it, to blend with it, is to gain it. Okay? It is to find oneself in tune with the music of the spheres. When we force things to happen, when we try to control outcomes, when we try to shape events according to our will, we lose. Because the universe has its own will. It doesn't always align with ours. When we go against the grain, when we ignore the signs, when we disregard the signals, when we violate the natural order, we lose. Because nature doesn't care about our plans. It doesn't listen to our demands. It doesn't bow to our might. It simply is. But when we go with the flow, when we follow the signs, when we respect the signals, when we live in harmony with nature, then we gain. Then we become one with the universe. We discover the secret of happiness, the art of living, the way of peace. As Lao Tzu said, be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So open your eyes and see the world anew. Open your heart and love the world as it is. Open your mind and accept the world without judgment. Open your soul and let the world fill you with joy. For in that moment, you will find yourself at one with the universe, at peace with yourself, at ease in the world. You will find yourself free. And so our journey through ancient China comes to its quiet end. We have walked the banks of the Yellow River. We have entered the temples of the Shang, the courts of the Zhou, the schools of Confucius, the offices of the Han, and the gardens of Taoist sages. At every step, life moved slowly, patiently, in cycles of work, ritual, record, and reflection. The dynasties have passed, but their rhythms remain. The brush on bamboo, the plow in soil, the bell in the temple, the silence in the garden. I am a writer and sometime professor at a university. I've written several books about ancient China, including The Art of War, The Tao of Maimonides, and The Analects of Confucius. My latest book is called 1,000 Years of Java, and today we are going to travel back there. Our final stop on our long journey through Chinese history brings us to the end of the second millennium. BCE to a time when the great social and political transformations that we've been following from the rise of the Shang to the end of the Western Zhou have run their course. By now, the cultural matrix of ancient China is fully formed, and the patterns of its civilization will endure for many centuries to come. The basic political order, the 5 relationships, the axial age of philosophical inquiry, the Confucian, Taoist, and legalist schools, the calendar, the written language, the arts and customs, the agricultural techniques, the worldview, all these things will persist through change and outlive the eras of the Shang, the Zhou, and even the longest-lived of the early dynasties, the Qin. In this concluding episode, then, rather than heeding the advice of King, one of Zhou and surveying the empire from the highest peak in the land, I want to return us to the gardens of the Taoist sages, to sit by the quiet waters of the Yellow River with Laozi and his like-minded friends, and contemplate the long arc of history from the beginning of time till now, to consider how it has unfolded in such a way as to produce this moment in which we find ourselves. As we do so, let us reflect once more on the 4 constants, the 4 sources of social order that we have met along the way. First, heaven, the mandate of which is passed from one dynasty to another, according to the virtue of its ruler. Second, earth, whose fertility provides the abundance that sustains civilization. Third, humanity, whose nature is good, whose potential is realized through education and self-cultivation, and whose relationships are harmonious when all parties fulfill their respective roles and perform their proper duties. Fourth, the ruler, who embodies the mandate of heaven, cultivates the land, exemplifies virtue, educates their subjects, and maintains the social order. These 4 constants offer a kind of stability to an otherwise turbulent world, a way of making sense of the rise and fall of civilizations, the waxing and waning of dynasties, and the endless cycle of human affairs. But what of change itself? What of history? How do we account for the constant flux that has brought us from the shamanic rituals of the early tribal era to the sophisticated institutions of early China? To answer this question, we turn to the final constant, the Tao, the way, the pattern of reality. For the Tao, while eternal and unchanging, manifests in myriad ways. Thus, although the pattern is always the same, each particular instance is unique. Each dynasty, each sage, each individual realizes the Tao in a different way according to their own circumstances and talents. This is why Confucius could say that the sage, while conforming to the pattern of the Tao, appears utterly without form. It is also why Lao Tzu compared the Tao to a great river. Just as water takes the shape of the vessel into which it is poured, so too does the Tao take shape in myriad ways, endlessly transforming itself while abiding by its own eternal nature. And so it is with the history of China. The pattern of the Tao manifests in countless particular ways through the rise and fall of dynasties, the ebb and flow of cultural forms, the coming and going of individuals. And yet the pattern persists. The Tao is one, though its manifestations are many. From the high peaks of the Himalayas to the Yellow Sea, from the Korean Peninsula to the Tarim Basin, the pattern of the Tao is one. As the great Taoist sage Lao Tzu said, "All the world is one family." His student Zhuangzi added, "The highest good of the Tao is that all the world is one." And indeed, it is the immanent Tao, the way that runs through all things, the connecting principle that gives rise to the unity of the cosmos, that makes it possible for us to speak of China at all. When we follow its winding path through millennia of cultural and historical transformation, we discover the persistence of certain constants. Heaven, earth, humanity, and the ruler, and the patterns of social order that they make possible. Family, society, state, and empire. We see how they interact and how they shape, and are shaped by the particular historical circumstances in which they find themselves. We see how the Tao manifests in the world through the rise and fall of civilizations, through the flourishing of cultural achievements, through the lives and teachings of exemplary individuals, and through the endless cycle of human affairs. We realize that all these particulars, great and small, are expressions of a single underlying unity. We come to see that the secret of China is not in any one thing, but in the interaction of all things, in the ceaseless movement, the dynamic balance of an eternal pattern. And so we end our journey where we began, with the Yellow River, the source of Chinese civilization, the cradle of the Chinese people, the wellspring of the Tao. The ancient Chinese looked to the Yellow River as the source of all life, the giver of fertility, the nourisher of the people. And as we look back over the long arc of Chinese history, from the rise of the first settlements along its banks to the flourishing of early Chinese civilization, we can see that it is here in the interaction between heaven and earth, humanity and the ruler, the past and the present, that the secret of China is to be found. Here in the interplay of these forces, the Tao manifests itself through the ages, giving rise to the endless variety of particular things, the rise and fall of dynasties, the flourishing of cultural achievements, the lives and teachings of exemplary individuals, and the endless cycle of human affairs. Here in the ceaseless movement, the dynamic balance of an eternal pattern, we find the heart of China. And here, if we are still and quiet, we can hear its music. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to learn more about ancient China, I invite you to join me for more.